Well, I just spent 2 hours doing from scratch the practice test. I managed to get it done in the 2 hours and recorded the whole thing for you. And when I was done, I checked and my recording didn't work. Yeah, I didn't have any audio. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing again, the whole 2 hours. So I have the solution that I built during that demonstration here of completing the practice test. So I'll just refer to this and kind of walk through the code and talk about a couple things that I think are important points to highlight, right? Sorry. All right, I'm just not going to do it again. So here we are. We have our wine type and wine classes, okay, with our annotations. They're going to be required to get everything in place that we need, right? Just a couple other notes here about friendly error messages, of course. Add a wine description summary property that we can use, right? Unique constraint on, now this was interesting, eh? Because although you did something similar in the lab work, I didn't actually demonstrate this specifically. So a combination of the wine name and wine year must be unique, right? So we'll look at how we do that. And of course, making some seed data and so on. Okay, so let's just come back here. Oh, I don't know why I have that other one open. So let me just get rid of that so that I don't have that confusing us. Okay, so here we are. So just starting with the model classes then. Right here, we have wine and wine type. So we start off with the basic properties, then, simple annotations that we've done before, display names, required attributes, string length, right? Just to limit it as per the instructions, okay? And we have our collection of wines. Then we come to the wine class, okay? We added a summary property here, combination of the name and the wine year. Okay, I'll use the display name wine description for that. And then we're going to have the actual separate properties. So they just have the necessary annotations. This one is using a regex. Okay. The wine year, as per the instructions, we're storing it as a string, but we have to make sure we just type in 4 numeric digits. Okay. So that takes care of that requirement. For the wine price, the required validation was a maximum value of 1,000. Okay. We don't just have a maximum or something, so we'll have a range of 0 to 1,000, and that should get the job done. Harvest date is a nullable date time. It didn't say required, so that means it's nullable, right? So we're going to make sure it's a date time date and in the correct format to show up properly in the controls when you're using Google Chrome. Okay, we add the display name to both the object and the integer for the foreign key, right? Because this is going to be automatically displayed on the screen for the object as well. So we need the display name on both because we don't want to see wine underscore name, hopefully. Now, of course, there was a requirement for the iValidatable object because we had a validation requirement that involved two separate properties, right? So if the wine harvest has a value, then we do a comparison, making sure that the dot year, like you could do this multiple ways. You could compare, if the date was in the date range and so on and so forth, but just grabbing the dot year from the wine harvest date, okay, that's a quick and easy way to see if it matches once we convert it to an integer, the wine year, right? Remember, it's stored as a string. And then we'll show the error message beside the actual wine harvest, okay, the harvest date. And that takes care of that. Now, of course, there was more work that had to be done inside the DB context, right? So in our wine context, okay, of course, at the end, we added all this back in to have the automatic auditing taking place, but really it came down to just our two DB sets. And in the Fluent API, we just make sure we can't delete a wine type if there are wines in it. That wasn't actually specified in the instructions, but it just makes so much sense that I just couldn't resist putting it in. But here's the one that is actually quite interesting, right? The unique combination of wine name and wine year. Now, we've done this kind of code with a primary key before, and we've made indexes that are unique. So here's a chance to actually combine the two techniques and say we're going to add an index on this combination that is unique, right? It's not a primary key, it's just an index, but it guarantees that within the record we never duplicate the same name with the same year, right? Everything else is just to do with the auditing. Okay, so that got us up to the basics. Now, of course, we had to do work we had to install the different packages. So let me just come up to the NuGet Package Manager, right? So with our installed packages, remember we had to add SQLite, made sure it was the same version. They were all updated to the same version, okay? Any updates? Oh, this one wasn't there earlier, right? So I could update it now. Uh, That package was added later automatically by the system as I was doing some work. Okay. All right. No harm done. Okay, let's carry on in our review then. So the wine context, right? There's nothing else to say here, but we did also have to do work in our program.cs once we got our SQLite in place, right? We make sure that the DB context, both the application one and our wine context, are using SQLite. And of course, we need a connection string for them to pull out, and that happens in app settings JSON. So I just set it to winesDB as the database. All right, that let us actually carry on. And the next thing we focused on was the actual initializer, right? So in here, after calling migrate, okay, we add our different wine types and then our wines. Now, I did in the earlier recording and talked about this quite a bit. Um, a lot of some students, actually one student in particular, emailed and asked. They had a hard time with. They didn't like using the add range approach to creating seed data. So they showed me this kind of code and asked if it was okay. Remember, we've talked about this because of the use of AI out there and the fact that we're trying to encourage you to learn from learning how to write code, not just have AI do it for you. I've been stressing that I want you to do things the way and with the methods and approaches that we're teaching in class. So it was good the student called and asked because I hadn't demonstrated this approach in class, and otherwise I wouldn't have accepted it. But since I'm going to share it with you now, it is something I used to do, right? I've done this in the past. So we can simply create a list of objects, right, quite quickly this way, and then use a for each on the list and just add each one to the context. And that's another way to approach it. So I don't really see any advantage to doing it this way as opposed to the add range, but I will accept this approach from now on as well, right? There's nothing wrong with it. It's a good approach. It has no real advantages I can see, but it does give you the same effect in the end. It's a nice simple way to seed data in, right? So I've got three different types, red, white, and port, and I'm just creating two different uh, uh, actual wines, a Riesling and a Shiraz, and making sure the wine year is actually in the same year that the harvest date is and so on, just so I don't get any validation errors in my actual seed data. Okay, all right, so that's in my initializer, so that gets our seeding happening there. Okay. Now we had to make a number of migrations. So notice I didn't even bother recreating the ones for the application DB context, but I had an initial migration and then a second one when we added the auditing, right? So that's okay. I can have the two migrations and they get applied in my initializer as long as I don't have the database, it'll seed all the data and away we go. Okay, so the next thing, let's go back to the instructions, right? So we talked about that unique constraint there. That was done in the DB context. Okay, that validation on the wine class, we looked at that inside the wine class itself. All right, then we created the controllers, and then we had to fix our drop-down lists. Now, I would probably be happier, but I thought, well, no, it's not something I'm going to insist on. So inside the wine controller, where we build this select list, right? The biggest problem with the select list as it was now was just the fact that it wasn't in any order, right? So we just added the order by clause. So whether you follow the good practice of consolidating this code so you don't repeat yourself instead of having this in multiple places, that would be an even better. But on a test like this, if you're in a hurry, if you just want to make this change to the four other spots, that's perfectly fine. I will accept that. I won't take marks off if you don't follow that dry approach. So I left the code that way. We just went in and updated it with the order by clause in each of the places where we use it. Now, in the end, of course, we also had to add it into the index in order to satisfy the requirement to filter and be able to choose the wine type out of our filter drop-down list. Okay, but there were a couple of other changes that were required as indicated in the instructions, right? Make sure the drop-down list for the wine type prompts the user they must make a decision. They have to force them to select a wine type. And that is actually a pretty straightforward thing. That is done in the actual create page, right? So we come down to the views for wine and create. Here is where originally this wasn't there, right? There was no span and there was no option, okay? By adding this option value at the top, okay, so it returns null unless you select a type of wine, and that forces them to make the decision. And then we also had to add a span because there was none here, and there was no way to show that error message saying, hey, no, you must select a wine type. So that was that one change there in the instructions, right? Okay. Um, Summary properties. Okay, and of course our navigation links. That's it, just in the layout. I don't have to spend time looking at that. All right, let's talk about error handling. Now, obviously, we've said many times it's important to do a try catch around any time you actually interact with the database. So if you did it in all 6 spots that we save changes, that's great. Okay, if you just did it where it's actually required here, right, as specified, I'll accept that as well for full marks. So in the create or edit for a wine, checking for that unique constraint on the combination of wine name and year, right? And for the wine type, just the delete. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Let me come back. I'm going to clean up my screen, just close everything. So it's really, we're talking about the controllers here. So in the wine type controller, as I said, the only one that for marks you had to do was the delete confirmed, right? Where then we go and get the record, we do the try catch, okay? And then in the catch, we check for that foreign key constraint failure and remind them they can't delete a wine type if there are wines in the system of that type, right? In the wine controller, the two you had to do were the edit and the create, both of them, right? So the post for create, right? Because we need to catch that unique constraint that they cannot have more than one wine with the same name in the same year, right? And that would happen in both the post for create and edit. Now, coming into edit, I would expect that you would change it to the um, try update model approach. That should always be done on a edit, right? Now you see in my code, actually I did all of them, but those are the ones that you're absolutely required to do for full marks in the test. Okay, then sorting and filtering for the wine index view, right? Now we didn't have to worry about persisting and remembering, just getting the filtering and sorting working on the index view itself. So the instructions were to do it for the filter by the type of wine and characters in the name, and sorting by the name, year, and price, right? So bringing up, we have the wine controller here already. So bringing up the wine index view, we'll just have a quick look at that. So we have our form at the top. Okay, I'm not worrying about showing and hiding it, just be there all the time. We'll just keep it simple. That's all that's required on the test. So we have our drop-down list for the wine types, right? Remember, I showed you that we added that to the select list into the view data in our index action, and our text box for our search string. Okay, our action button here to apply our filter, and our clear button. Okay, the whole page is wrapped inside the form so that the column headings then can act as links for filtering or for sorting. We have our wine name, our year, and our price. Okay, these ones will look the same, but they don't do anything, right? Okay, so coming back to the controller, what we had to do in the index then, way up here in the index, we had to add the different parameters for search string, wine type ID. Okay, those are our two filters, and then we need the action button, sort direction, and sort fields. We had a default name of wine name, right? Then, as we already looked at, we have our select list for the dropdown, right? These are sort options, are just wine name, year, and price, right? We go and we added as no tracking to make sure that this was an iQueryable. Then we can add our filters. So if the wine type ID has a value, we filter by the wine type. If the search string has something, then we check the wine name. We just convert everything to uppercase. So we're not comparing apples and oranges. And we make sure we find any wines with those characters in the name, whatever characters we typed in. Standard block here for just checking about sorting, right? Deciding if we're doing ascending or descending and so on, okay? Then if it's price, we just do order by price or order by descending wine price. If it's year, same thing, order by descending or year. Okay, and then for the wine name, the way we go. Store our sort field and sort direction. Oh, forgot to show you. Those are back in here. We added those two hidden inputs right up here at the top. And that took care of that. Now, the last part on the instructions was the auditing. Okay, so the basic auditing for wine type and wine. Well, that was just a matter of adding the classes, right? So here in models, we added the audible and iAudible, exactly the same we've done in our other projects. For each one, we made sure we inherited from auditable, right? Then to make it work in the actual DB context, we had to come to program. We had to add this, right? The ability for our services to add this singleton, our HTTP context accessor, because that is used in the actual DB context so that we can actually find out who is logged in, and so we know who to blame for making changes, right? No, oh, not that. I mean the one, the DB context, right? So that's our HTTP context accessor, which we get now through the constructor here, right? And we're just using the same code we had before. Unknown if we don't know who it is. C data, right? If there is no HTTP context, and then we just override the save changes and save changes async. Both times we're calling our on before saving, which just puts the proper values in place. And that basically is that. That completes the whole test requirements. So sorry I didn't manage to record the whole review as I built the whole thing from scratch, but at least we kind of gone over a quick discussion of it. You know, I noticed one thing that I probably did wrong there in the wine controller and the sort. Um, Here when I'm doing the year, okay, if my order is ascending, I'm saying order by descending. You know what? In the end, when you run, could you tell? I mean, you click it and it reverses, right? So I don't know if you would even know uh, that that was a boo-boo in my code there. So if I bring up wines, so right now I'm sorting by the wine name, right? Now if I create a new wine, because I got to have at least one more wine. Let's say the name is uh, Riesling. Did I spell that right? No, I didn't. See, I should practice my German more. Riesling. Oh, I'm going to go with 2007, right? Price $1. And okay, let's do it a little more reasonable. Yeah, there we go. The date must be during the wine year. Ah, okay. And it can have the same, more than one wine with the same name in the same year. I already have a 2007 Riesling, right? Ah, good. So uh, I'll change this to 2005, but of course I'll have to change that to 2005 before I'll be able to actually successfully save that. Okay, so now I got a few different wines at least. So my point was that which one was it? I didn't have, okay, the price. No, it's the year, order by descending. So if I select year, see it's going by descending. Now it's descending. It doesn't really matter, does it? Okay. In the end, you click it and you can see that it's going the opposite way, right? Yeah, so it's working. I wouldn't worry too much about it, but technically, I should have that if it's ASC, then this should be order by, and then if it's descending, it should have been that way. Will it make a difference? Not really. Because you see, it just reverses. But anyway, that was the little thing I noticed I missed when I did the test. Would I take off marks from you for that? Absolutely not. Okay. All right. So hopefully that'll be a bit of a help to you just to review that, and away we go.